Coming up on Bridge City News, the National Prayer Breakfast took place in Ottawa today with an inspirational message from many, including Conservative leader Andrew Scheer. A local beekeeper shared his concerns with BCN over the potential invasion of the Asian murder hornet. And we hear from our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson, who has more details as to which businesses will be allowed to reopen in Alberta next week.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. The 55th Annual National Prayer Breakfast of Canada took place earlier today in Ottawa. It's a Christ-centered event held by the Parliamentary Prayer Breakfast Group. Now this year, because of COVID-19, it was held virtually with people tuning in from across Canada. The purpose of the long-running event is for Christians to come together collectively to celebrate the love of God. It allows for elected officials to gather together with men and women from different backgrounds to pray and connect through faith. Conservative leader Andrew Scheer participated and quoted some scripture from Psalm 146.
Lord reigns forever, your God, O Zion, for all generations. Praise the Lord. So as we reflect on the passages that are being read, I think given the fact that we so recently celebrated Easter and Palm Sundays, we should also keep in mind those who are worshiping around the world in fear. We are facing a challenge today with not being able to be in the same room together because of health concerns. This is new for us and it's unique, but there are people from around the world who are afraid to meet together to pray and to worship because they live in countries where that freedom is denied to them, and they have to do things like this on a regular basis to avoid persecution. So as we pray for a swift end to the temporary crisis that we're facing here in Canada, let's also pray for freedom for all of our brothers and sisters of faith around the world.
Bridge City News also heard from a local pastor about the significance of the National Prayer Breakfast for Canada.
One of the most important things when it comes to prayer, for me, is intercession. That means praying on behalf of somebody else, on behalf of a nation. God hears our prayer. And when God hears our prayer, He heals nations. There is a healing that occurs at a personal level, but there is also healing that occurs at a national level. So when we gather and unite together in prayer, God hears and liberates nations.
Mother's Day is coming up this Sunday, a special day to celebrate our moms. Retired Pastor Abe Block stopped by our studio recently to discuss the important role moms play.
Look at the public system. We took God and prayer out of the schools, and what happened? We've had more shootings in the last years than we ever had before. What if we would take mom out of the home? I think it does have an effect. And so I'm not opposed to moms working at all, but I'm just thinking in terms of when we remove them. Are there good babysitters? Absolutely. Are there good daycares? Absolutely. But they're not mom.
Catch the entire interview with retired Pastor Abe Block and Jeanette Roche talking about mom in the second half of our show. Close to $18 million in grants will be provided for childcare centres and approved family day home agencies in Alberta. The funds are to ensure that both groups are ready to safely restart and support families through our province's economic recovery. Staff at Narnia Childcare Centre in Lethbridge say they're excited to get things up and running again.
We are a small business, so to get things up and running again, all of the costs and expectations that we have to be, having to pay for things like that, it's important that we get that money. And it's also hard. I mean, it's hard for us because we have family that's wanting to come back as well, right? And we don't know what that brings on their side of things, but it's a need for sure to have that money. And also we think of staff who are just at home and wanting to get back into the field to work again. We want to support them so that they can get their feet on the ground and pay the bills that they have as well. So this is the job that I love, and this is why I do what I do, is because the passion is there, and it brings me almost to tears because I want to be able to see them again and be a part of their lives again. And this journey's been a hard go as far as what's happening, so I can imagine how hard it would be in the children as well.
All reopened child care centres in Alberta will receive a $500 one-time grant for personal protective equipment and cleaning supplies. The province is coming to the aid of our agriculture industry. A new fed cattle set-aside program, or animals on a feedlot, will allow beef producers to hold on to slaughter-ready cattle for several weeks. Officials say this will allow the supply of animals to more evenly match demand and reduce processing capacity. Currently, there are about 130,000 cattle backed up in feedlots as a result of reduced operating capacity at processing plants in Alberta due to COVID-19. The province says it will also increase an interim payment from 50% to 75% for the hog sector. This will put up to $25 million into the hands of pork producers immediately. Government officials also said that they're increasing the advance payment from 50% to 75% for the potato industry, since they too have taken a hit during the COVID-19 pandemic. Chances are you've heard of the Asian murder hornet. They come from forests and low mountains in Asia. The killer hornets have made their way to Washington State and now British Columbia. Beekeepers and honey producers have something new to worry about outside of the coronavirus, because the murder hornets can wipe out entire bee populations quite quickly. As Micah Quinn explains, a local beekeeper near Fort Macleod in Alberta has heard of the hornets and hopes the species can be eradicated quickly before they come to our province.
This is the Asian murder hornet, and it has arrived in North America. The hornets are especially dangerous to honeybees because they fly into the hives and kill bees in large numbers. Jerry Pullman is the president of Pullman Apiaries Limited, and he says that it's too early to worry about the hornets coming to Alberta.
Yeah, they say that they live in temperate climates, and we live in a temperate climate, so they could be a challenge if they ever got established here. So it is something to be concerned about, but I think it's a little bit premature yet.
Pullman Apiaries Limited has European honeybees, and those bees are different compared to their Asian counterparts. They also differ in the way that they protect themselves from murder hornets.
The Asian honeybee, from what I remember, kind of balls the hornet and then creates a temperature increase around it, and they can kill it by increasing the temperature, but it's a defense mechanism probably developed over a long period of time. Our bees probably wouldn't be aware of that.
Pullman says that they've had to deal with hornets in the past, but of a smaller variety than the Asian murder hornet.
In the past, we've had to deal with hornets here and yellow jackets, wasps, and I don't think we've ever used a smoker. Sometimes those pests can also be a challenge to deal with, not as much in the south as you go a little bit further north.
Entomologists are gathering in Washington State to figure out a way to eradicate the murder hornets before they wipe out entire bee populations. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
Some of Canada's top country artists, including Gord Bamford and Brett Kissel, are taking part in a virtual concert in support of Stars Air Ambulance Foundation. The nonprofit group says that fundraising is essential in order to keep its operations running.
It's business as usual for operations. They're still flying 8 missions a day across all 3 provinces. And we have to fundraise to make sure that they keep this, the helicopters in the sky. So 100% of these fundraising dollars that we're going to raise on Friday night are going to go directly to supporting our operations in all 3 provinces. So you can dial 1-855-516-4848 to call to donate. You can also text to donate. So you can text 45678 and just put stars in the line there, and it will you'll donate $20 by doing that. And then also you can click to donate at streamingforstars.ca.
The event will be taking place tomorrow at 7 p.m. and you can tune in online at stars.ca for the full performance. Physical distancing mandates have not stopped a Facebook group known as Secret Sisters from finding creative ways to celebrate women in Lethbridge. As Loris Alexander explains, incredible things can happen when women support other women.
Only 3 days ago, Megan Turner started a Facebook group called Secret Sisters of Lethbridge and Area to pay it forward. The group now has over 2,000 members and growing.
I did not expect anything of the sort or of this magnitude. I expected, maybe 100, 200 ladies from maybe previous workplaces, my current workplace. My mom and her girlfriends usually get along and decide to play along with some of these things that we do. As for 2,000 members in a matter of a couple days, really shocked me, and every day my phone's just pinging off the rails, and it's shocking. It's very shocking.
There are single moms who have been isolated. We know that there are essential women workers in the community. And when you open your door and receive a magic gift, a secret gift from someone, that ignites your heart. And you know that no matter what, if you're isolated, you are not alone through this time.
I don't even care if I receive anything. The fact that I get to put a smile on somebody's face, and right now, some of us can't be working. We are pretty thankful that we are able to work, so we have that little bit extra to give back. But I've also seen lots of women making things and giving it back to women, and I think that's such a fantastic idea as well.
For Bridge City News, I'm Loris Alexander.
Alert's Medicine Hat organized crime team made another drug bust. This one took place May 1st in Bassano. Police confiscated 235 grams of methamphetamine, 78 grams of fentanyl, 9 grams of cocaine, just under $1,000 in cash, and a loaded handgun. 3 suspects from Calgary were taken into custody. 53-year-old Robert Jones, 52-year-old Deborah McIntosh, and 42-year-old Gerald Wright face a wide range of charges, including firearms-related offenses and drug possession. Mounties are asking for any vehicle dashcam footage related to a shooting in central Alberta that ended in a brief police chase and a shootout on a highway south of Edmonton. RCMP responded to a firearms complaint yesterday in Blackfalds near Red Deer before a man fled in a black BMW sedan and headed north on Highway QE2. Police say there was a confrontation when the car stopped that led to the 27-year-old driver's death and a serious injury to the police officer. Investigators want any footage that would have been taken on highways between Blackfalds and Leduc between 8:15 a.m. and 9:45 a.m. yesterday. The repatriation of 6 Canadian Forces members killed when their helicopter crashed last week in Greece took place at CFB Trenton in Ontario. Families and dignitaries wore masks. The crowds were gathered outside of the base were sparse, and authorities asked people not to line the route along the Highway of Heroes from the base to Toronto because of the COVID-19 pandemic restrictions. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says frontline workers making minimum wage during the COVID-19 pandemic deserve a raise. Trudeau says the federal government, provinces and territories will spend around $4 billion to increase wages to essential workers battling during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Today I can announce that we have an agreement with all the provinces and territories to provide a wage top-up for essential workers, for Canadians who are being called to go to work every day, for Canadians who are providing us with essential services so we can continue to keep our families safe and healthy. Right now, we're finalizing the details with the last provinces, and I want to underscore that this has been a truly collaborative effort.
Trudeau added that Ottawa will cover 3/4 of the cost for this program. Our country's Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Theresa Tam, is putting warnings and advice in place when it comes to Canadians wanting to head out to cabins or rural properties this summer. Tam says Canadians need to be careful not to put added stress on local health systems during the COVID-19 pandemic.
If you ventured into an area that has low capacity, for example, more remote, more rural, where the access is an issue, and you may impact the local community, that's, I think, the highest concern of public health authorities. So those situations might actually be quite different throughout the country. So I think that's one of the key points.
The province of Alberta announced that there were 54 new cases of COVID-19 today, including 2 new deaths, bringing the total number of fatalities to 114. There are now 6,017 confirmed cases of the virus, but also 3,809 recovered cases. Our province's Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Dina Henshaw, says as the temperature warms up and you're tempted to go outside and get together in groups, you have to use common sense.
We all want to be able to gather again. We humans are hardwired for connection, and physical closeness is not fully replaced by virtual gatherings. Whether a religious gathering or social gathering, I know we are all missing being together in ways that we once took for granted. Despite this, I am asking you to remain cautious. I am asking you to keep being creative about other ways of connecting and sharing meaningful moments. Gatherings of no more than 15 are allowed, but as you plan ways of connecting, please consider all your options and make sure that any gathering that happens in person is well planned and ensures physical distancing, no sharing of food or drink, and make sure that you're thinking about ways for those who are at higher risk of severe outcomes from COVID to participate remotely.
Provinces across Canada are slowly reopening their economies during the COVID-19 pandemic. Our legislative reporter, Tyler Dawson, says if you've been in dire need of a haircut, you should finally be able to get one late next week.
May 14th is the date set for retail to open. That will include, stores. That'll include hairdressers, as you mentioned. That'll also include restaurants, bars, cafes, not nightclubs, but it will, in theory, include pubs. It's that's a tricky little situation that's dependent on what liquor license an establishment has. But assuming cases continue to go down, assuming cases continue to stabilize, things should kick off May 14th.
Watch the full interview with Tyler Dawson, who will have more details of Alberta's relaunch plans coming up after business news. BC outlined a gradual reopening of its economy today. It included a plan for health services, retail outlets, restaurants, and salons. All of the government's reopening plans are contingent on organizations developing proposals that follow provincial guidelines to control the spread of COVID-19.
As we start to relax some of the social restrictions, small social gatherings with physical distancing will be allowed. The choices you make about expanding your social circle will depend on your age, your occupation, and the health of the people that you live with. Here's what it could look like. Grandchildren visiting grandparents with safe social distancing. Play dates with kids, again, with safe social distancing. Small numbers of friends gathering outdoors or in home, again, small numbers. The key is only small gatherings.
Starting next week, Ontario will allow curbside pickup from non-essential retail stores. Ontario Premier Doug Ford says garden centres will be allowed to open on Friday, while hardware stores will be allowed to open on Saturday.
We've laid the groundwork for the gradual and safe reopening. We released a framework with clear public health criteria to meet before proceeding to each stage of reopening. Working in partnership with our health and safety associations, we've released over 60 workplace safety guidelines to help businesses protect their employees and customers. I'm prepared to announce that as of Friday, May the 8th, at 12:01 a.m., garden centers and nurseries will be allowed to open.
Hotels and many popular resorts were forced to close during the coronavirus pandemic. Even beach hotels in Fort Myers, Florida, which were considered an essential business, were shut down. With tourism numbers at an all-time low due to the pandemic, owners are doing everything they can to stay on their feet.
This time of year is when we save up to get us through the shoulder summer season and then our really slow fall season. So without those reserves, I'm really not sure what we're going to be looking at.
I mean, we had probably $250,000 in reservations canceled. It was just devastating. I mean, from March 13th till March 30th, we saw our whole spring and summer business just disappear.
All of the folks I know in the smaller resorts, no one's taking paychecks. Obviously, the owners, nobody. There are a number of resorts that have kept on their key personnel, and they're paying those people, and then they themselves are not taking any pay. And that's pretty much across the board. I haven't heard of anybody who's an owner who's taking pay at this point. They're trying to keep their employees on instead.
Despite rumors that he died on the operating table, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is alive and well. The Christian organization Open Doors says it's vital for believers around the world to pray for North Korea's leader and for the underground church facing extreme persecution there.
Health scare rumors surrounding Kim Jong-un were reportedly unfounded. After the North Korean leader went 20 days without appearing in public, there was speculation he was suffering from heart problems. Some media reports claimed he was gravely ill or even dead, but he then appeared at a fertilizer factory, apparently in good health. Meanwhile, the country claims to have no outbreak of the coronavirus. But Open Doors' Ronald Boyd McMillan says if the pandemic did sweep the country, it could expose many of North Korea's underground believers.
It brings out Christian ethics and loving kindness towards other people, especially the stranger, in a way that is very unusual. And so sometimes it can actually make it worse for the church, because if families in the name of Christ help other people from dying, providing food, this kind of thing, giving them aid and so on, it makes them a target because they come up to the surface where the authorities can see them and identify them as Christians. And then, if that would be the case, they would be marched off into these Auschwitz-like camps.
He concluded by encouraging believers to pray for the persecuted church in North Korea as well as their leader.
Don't forget to pray for Kim Jong-un. He needs the Lord. Also pray for all the organizations such as Open Doors that are seeking to continue to go across the border and render help and aid at this time. And just pray for the Christians in North Korea, because very often they report that they feel the prayers of Western believers physically.
Peter Wooding for the Global News Alliance.
We had a little rain here in southwestern Alberta today, and more of it's in the forecast. Full weather details are on deck. We had clouds mixed with sunshine today and some spotty showers. Jeanette Roche is here now with a complete look at the weather forecast. Jeanette, we could see a little more rain tonight and into tomorrow.
Yeah, well, not only that, we could also see a risk of some thunderstorms this evening and into tomorrow as well. So tonight we have a 30% chance of rain, a risk of an evening thunderstorm, wind gusts 40 km/h, overnight low of 5 degrees. And into tomorrow we could see that 60% chance of rain as well, with a risk of an afternoon thunderstorm and 60 km/h winds as well, with a high of 13 degrees. So we could be seeing some wet and windy conditions upon us tomorrow. And then as we look further on into the weekend and the days beyond, we're going to be seeing the sunshine on Saturday with a high of 13 degrees. So there, 10 degrees expected for Sunday with a mix of sun and cloud, partly cloudy skies again for Monday with a high of 8, 15 expected on Tuesday, and 17 for Wednesday with a mix of sun and cloud for both of those days. Now that average high 17 degrees, average low for the overnights 3. The highest temperature on this day was back in 1987. It was 30 degrees and it was -6 back in 2000. So the sun rose this morning just before 6 a.m. as you can see there, 5:58, and the Thursday evening sunset 8:58 p.m., giving us almost exactly 15 hours of sunlight. Now, as we take a look across the country, we're going to be seeing Victoria and Vancouver are almost the only places not raining tomorrow. So 22 and 21 degrees are expected to be the highs there on the coast. Edmonton, 14 degrees, 10 degrees expected in Calgary. Calgary could see a risk of an afternoon thunderstorm, and it's going to be a chance of rain in Edmonton as well. Chance of showers also in both Regina and Saskatoon, 13 degrees the high in Saskatoon, 15 for Regina, 7 degrees the high in Winnipeg. We're seeing the sun shining for the first part of the day. They could be seeing some periods of rain later on. Now, Toronto and Ottawa, chance of flurries or showers tomorrow, high of 5 degrees. A risk of an overnight frost happening in Montreal with a high of 9 degrees. They could see chance of rain for the rest of the day. All of this whole area in Atlantic Canada, we're going to be seeing fog roll in overnight and dissipate tomorrow morning with periods of rain for the rest of the day for this whole region. Fredericton's high 11, same for Charlottetown. Halifax high 12 degrees and a high of 8 degrees expected tomorrow for St. John's, Newfoundland. There you go, that is your weather.
Neiman Marcus declared bankruptcy today, making it the largest U.S. retailer to collapse since the coronavirus outbreak devastated the American economy. The high-end department store chain had nearly $5 billion in annual sales. Company officials said the COVID-19 pandemic placed a lot of disruption and pressure on their business. Neiman Marcus says it expects to emerge from bankruptcy sometime in the fall. Canadian Tire is reporting a loss of $13.3 million in its first quarter. That compared with a profit of $69.7 million in the first quarter last year. Retail sales fell 2% to nearly $2.76 billion due to its temporary closing of Sport Chek and Mark stores due to the COVID-19 containment measures. On a normalized basis, the company says it lost 13 cents per share for the quarter. That is below the loss of 11 cents that analysts had expected. Earnings from TELUS in the first quarter is down 19% from a year ago to $353 million. Operating revenue rose by 5.4% to $3.69 billion. Adjusted earnings came in at 32 cents per share, below what analysts were expecting. The Vancouver-based company says investments in its networks and an increase in acquisition-related accounting expenses more than offset growth in earnings from its business. TELUS is maintaining its quarterly dividend at 29 cents per share, but is withdrawing its financial guidance for 2020 because of uncertainty caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Canadian Natural Resources is cutting its capital spending by an additional $280 million and is looking at cutting costs by $745 million. The oil sands company is taking the step due to the drastic plunge in oil prices as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the price war between Saudi Arabia and Russia. The company now expects capital spending to total $2.68 billion. That is down from its original budget of $4.05 billion. The spending cuts came as the company reported a first quarter loss of $1.28 billion compared with a profit of $961 million a year ago. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 2 points on the day to 14,833. The Dow was up 211 to 23,875. The S&P 500 was up 32 points to finish the day at 2881, and the Nasdaq was up 125 points to 8979. Oil was down 62 cents to 23.37 per barrel. Natural gas was down 4 cents to $1.90. Gold was down 2 cents to $17.1604, and silver was up a cent to $15.36 an ounce. Wheat is at $234 per metric ton, barley's at $231, canola's at $466, and corn is at $230 per metric ton. Live cattle were up $4.50 to $93.98, feeder cattle were up $6.18 to $130.85, and lean hogs were up 70 cents to $68.95. The Canadian dollar was down slightly on the day to 71.54 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, the number of COVID-19 cases across Canada is closing in on 64,000, with more than 4,200 deaths. Chief Public Health Officer Dr. Theresa Tam said fortunately more than 28,500 people have recovered from the virus. Here in Alberta, there have been just under 6,000 confirmed cases, with just over 3,500 people recovering from the virus. There have also been 112 coronavirus-related deaths, including 6 here in the South Zone. Mother's Day is coming up this weekend. Up next, BCN's Jeanette Rocher chats with retired pastor Abe Block about what important attributes mom brings to the table. That interview is coming right up.
Every Mother's Day, we honor our moms. They deserve it. It's one of the toughest jobs out there, but perhaps also one of the most rewarding. Joining me now is Pastor Abe Block. You're retired, but you're still a pastor. Thank you for joining us here at Bridge City News. We love having you here.
It's good. I love being here. It's a great place to be.
Yeah, well, thank you. Okay, so Abe, we were talking a little bit before this started, and you come from a very large family. There's 9 of you, siblings, I guess,
Yes.
right? So you saw your mom raise a house full of kids, and then between you and your current wife, you have how many kids and grandkids?
Well, between my wife and I, and it's a second wife, we both lost our first spouses to cancer. And so it's a second marriage, and between us, we have 6 children, 26 grandchildren, and 10 great-grandchildren, and another one coming in June.
Okay, so you've seen your spouses raise children, and you see what they go through. So, and I'm also certain that you've given tons of sermons over the years about Mother's Day. So what kind of messages do you tell people about mom?
Well, you know, that's exactly a challenge. We were talking about that ahead of time. Actually, on Mother's Day, we should be having the moms responding. And since you're a mom, I may challenge you a little bit later on as to how things work. But, you know, Mother's Day is crucial. And the challenge with Mother's Day, I think, often is, in our society today, we often have the question asked, are you only a mom? And our society comes from the perspective that being only a mother just doesn't cut it, which is unfortunate. And I sometimes think that moms are so important. I remember one of my daughters, when she came home from school, even when she was in high school already, one of the things she needed desperately was when she came home, she needed somebody to listen to her day. And if my wife hadn't have been there, you know. So for the first half hour when she got home from school, my wife sat down with her, okay, talk to me. Or they were in the kitchen together, talk to me. It's all about relationships, and you said it. It's such an incredibly important responsibility it's not a job. And I remember I traveled with a quartet for many years, full-time ministry and evangelism, and we traveled halfway around the world. And I often got asked by people, does your wife work?
Oh, wow.
And I said, wow, does she ever work? And I would roll off, because she was a stay-at-home mom, I would roll off all the things she does.
Yeah.
No, we didn't mean that. We meant, does she work outside of the home? See, there's the
or does she have a real job, right?
Does she have a real job?
Yeah, there
That's
you go.
a key one. And I, as I think about that, I think about mums in the home and mums working. And don't get me wrong, I have nothing against mums working, okay? You're working, all right? And you're a mom. But the problem is, look at the public system. We took God and prayer out of the schools, and what happened? We've had more shootings in the last years than we ever had before. What if we would take mom out of the home? I think it does have an effect. And so I'm not opposed to mums working at all, but I'm just thinking in terms of when we remove them. Are there good babysitters? Absolutely. Are there good daycares? Absolutely. But they're not mom.
Absolutely. And it's an important role, like we were talking about. Now, there's an old saying, the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world, right? So to what degree do moms influence their children to become all that they can become? This is an important one.
I go back to what we just said, the hand that rocks the cradle. So my question is, who's rocking the cradle? Is it mom, or is it daycare, or is it a babysitter? Because I think, in a sense, the statement is very true. Moms influence and impact their children at an early age very much. And so I think it's important that they have that relationship. There's a certain security in having that one person at that age. And there's confidence in that. And so how many moms have taught and trained from an early age prime ministers and presidents and CEOs and people like that? Absolutely, I think they influence and impact, and that leads to.
Now, being a good role model, of course, is important, but the reality is, as parents, we all fail at times, right? So how should moms handle that when they fail, and especially if our kids know it? How to deal with that?
Well, 1 John 1:9 says, if we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us our sins. Now that talks about sin. That's not failure. There's a difference between the two. We all fail. And my feeling is if and when a mom is there with her child from youth, there's a relationship. And relationships are so very important. In that relationship, I would expect that the mother is also letting the child know the world is not perfect. People are not perfect. That child grows up with that syndrome. So I think it only fair that when a mother fails in that sense, the best thing to do is to live with integrity and communicate with that child. See, I am not perfect either. Will you forgive me?
Oh.
I think statements like that to children are extremely important. I remember I had a run-in with my son just before he left off for school. And I didn't have many run-ins with him because he was that kind of a guy. It wasn't his dad, it was him. He was just that kind of a boy. Anyway, I called him at school in the middle of the morning. The secretary said, he's in class. I said, I don't care. This is his dad. I need to apologize to my son now.
Oh, wow.
And, that had an incredible influence in his life, I think. So I think parents need to be free and open with that. Don't be afraid. They're not going to run away from you. They won't.
Yeah.
They will appreciate your honesty and your integrity.
Yeah, it's a learning opportunity for
Absolutely.
them too. Yeah. Now, as a mom, of course, I know that we're all way too hard on ourselves. But is it okay if the laundry is piling up, or if you got impatient with your kids today?
Absolutely. That's my short answer. Absolutely. But the question begs, what's the reason? What's the motivation behind it? Am I lazy and not doing the laundry? That's an excuse. That's not a reason. I told you about my daughter who needed to communicate. If my wife was in the middle of doing laundry and my daughter walked in the door after school, she dropped the laundry to take time for the daughter. That's legit.
Wow. And what a message that would send to your daughter, too, that she's a priority.
She's important.
Right? Yeah.
She's important.
Yeah.
And my daughter, now that same daughter, she has 10 children living here in Lethbridge. I was intrigued. When my first wife died, I lived with them for a little bit. And I was intrigued by the fact that some of her kids were still small. And when they came running and with some challenges or something, she would get down on her haunches, eye level to talk to them. See, to me, stuff like that is key. Because the child feels, I'm a somebody, I'm important.
Yeah, no, exactly. Now, stay-at-home moms and moms who work, I've been a bit of both throughout my life. Obviously, there's stress issues that come with both. So what would you say to moms who need a break?
Well, you see, the break comes where? A working mom needs a break because she's trying a full-time job over here and a full-time job at home. You can't do 2 full-time jobs in a day. It's impossible. So something has to give.
Exactly.
The flip side is a stay-at-home mom is there with the children day after day after day. She needs a break from that. So for those people, I would say, Mr. Husband, let your wife, I don't care if she leaves the house or not, but on the weekend when you're not working, take the kids. Take them somewhere. Give her space away from the children. For moms that are working, that's a challenge because they're only home such a short time, so you don't want to take the kids away.
Yeah.
She needs a break from the work issue.
Right.
So those are challenging questions, and I don't have solutions for them, but I think everybody, the mom and the dad, need to work that out.
Right.
I really think, and the kids, as they grow, if the parents are really communicating and have a relationship, they can walk with them through this stuff as they learn. And the children can begin to appreciate and do something themselves to help their mom get a break.
Right. And of course, the guilt trip will usually come in too.
Oh,
Not
wow.
necessarily from the kids, but a lot of times the moms feel guilty if you want to take a break from your kids.
Well, how would you handle it?
Felt guilty.
Yeah.
I spent years
See,
feeling
there
guilty.
you go. Exactly. And there's no need for the guilt.
Right.
It's a matter of working it out to the satisfaction of both parents and the children.
Well, that kind of leads me to another question, because that's provided there are 2 parents there. So what about single moms? I mean, that's a challenge. A challenge is also finding a good male role model for the child as well.
Well, like I said before, I traveled with a quartet in evangelism for many, many years, which meant we were gone for 3, 4, 5 weeks at a time, which meant my wife for that time was a single mom. Now, as far as my son, my oldest is a boy, as far as my son was concerned, he got involved. The church had an incredible program for Boys Club. And one of the fellows that was in charge, one of the leaders, also happened to be a fairly good friend. You know, he took special interest in my son when I was gone. He became a male role model to my son till he was 13 years old, and then I stayed home and took a different job. That's one way to do it. For a single mom, find people. Don't be afraid to have male friends. I know sometimes that's a problem, but don't be afraid to have male friends who can be a male model to your children without creating, a problem. Oh, now what's going on in that household, And that's a challenge.
It is a challenge.
That's a challenge.
Yeah.
But it is possible, for example, Big Brothers.
Absolutely.
We have organizations like that, okay?
Yeah.
But the thing about all of this is, moms, when they're home, have an influence, positive and negative. It's the same with when you find a big brother or somebody like that, and the same with finding babysitters and daycares. Try and find people that have a positive outlook on life. As a believer, I would say, if possible, obviously Christians, but that's not always possible. But at least people that have a positive outlook on life, you know, because to me that's important, because they're going to influence either positive or negative.
That's right. And it might take some time to
Absolutely.
find that person.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about Mother's Day in the few minutes that we have left. So this Sunday, of course, is Mother's Day. That's why we're talking about moms right now. One thing that's really on my mind, of course, right now is COVID-19 and the isolation going on. And I know with my mom, she's not in a long-term care facility or anything, but she's in a seniors block. And they're really strict on who comes and goes, obviously. My mom has an immunodeficiency as well. And so she is very cognizant about what's going on right now. So as a result, we didn't get to spend my son's birthday with her. We didn't get to spend Easter with her. I handed her flowers through the window of my car and the card. So now it's coming up on Mother's Day, same thing. This is a challenge. How do we spend time with mom on Mother's Day when they're in isolation?
Well, I'll tell you, on Facebook, there have been a lot of suggestions. I don't know if you've seen them. A lot of children, young children going to see their grandparents, along with their mothers going to see the are going to where these people are. And they're doing all kinds of fun stuff outside in the parking lot.
Right.
They phone ahead of time, tell them, come to the window at this point in time. And I know one family, 3 children, went into the parking lot was kind of in the center and the buildings were around. That grandmother phoned everybody else in there, and when these kids came, they started doing certain dances, and everybody was looking out of the windows and watching them dance and dancing in their own rooms. We have to find a way. I don't know if I have suggestions, except a lot of these things. Make phone calls. If they're on I was going to say Instagram, not Instagram.
Social media.
Social
Facebook,
media, any kind
even,
of social media. Get them on there, communicate.
Right.
I still have, there are still 8 of us left in my family. Just last Friday, we were on Zoom, all of us, all 8
That's
of us.
amazing.
So there you go. There's this Zoom thing, and I know that my sister, for example, does this with all of her children and grandchildren every week. She goes on Zoom. You know, there are neat things that you can do to keep communication opening. And I know that some of my friends who have parents in a home have made bread, have made meals, and made different, they bring it to the front. And the people inside take it and take it to them. You know, there are so many ways with our modern technology that we can have a relationship. We need to do that.
Yeah, I love how more and more seniors are getting more techie as well. My mom isn't. She's still not on the bandwagon with the cell phones or the laptop. So that's a challenge. So maybe she'll see this and she'll be like, oh, maybe I should.
And this might be the time when she does. Just
never
for the
know.
sake of getting rid of her loneliness.
You
and stuff
never
like
know.
That.
Pastor Abe, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
I have loved being here, Jeanette. God bless you and all of us in the midst of this COVID-19.
The Alberta legislature was recalled recently. MLAs are planning on tackling 2 important pieces of legislation, and they were introducing some other ones as well. To talk more about it is our legislative reporter, Tyler Dawson, who's also the Alberta correspondent for the National Post. Tyler, one of the bills, Bill 13, deals with local states of emergency, otherwise known as the Emergency Management Amendments Act.
Yeah, that's right. So there's a handful of bills that are sort of in the late stages of becoming law that the legislature has returned to sort of deal with. And one of them is the emergencies sort of measures situation. And the basic premise of that back when it was introduced was that this was going to allow sort of more local flexibility when it came to handling emergencies. So obviously a relevant piece of legislation at the moment as we go into wildfire season, as we're watching the floods in Fort McMurray and things like that. There's a couple other things sort of in that category of stuff that's almost finished. The bill on human trafficking is in there.
2 other bills are also being discussed. One is rights for mobile home tenants, and another is to give homeowners a break and deferring utility payments for those affected by COVID-19. Tell me more about those.
Yeah, so the deferral of utility payments is sort of the big new one, as far as I understand it. House Leader Jason Nixon had announced it earlier this week, and that sort of fulfills a promise from back in March that there would be a utility deferral for utility payments. So details all sort of to be hammered out on that. Now, of course, the NDP coming back and saying, this doesn't go far enough to help people affected by this. But as I think we've talked about numerous times, this is just part of a large sort of package of things that the provincial government is doing on the COVID-19 front, and to provide some relief to regular people and business owners. Now, the other thing you mentioned about mobile home tenants. Now, the UCP moved to sort of overhaul tenancy disputes a few months ago. And for whatever reason, for a long time, mobile home tenants seem to sort of be left out. So what this does, I believe, is just sort of bring everyone under a similar sort of system when dealing with disputes between landlords and tenants.
Now, there was also a motion put forward to support legal gun owners' rights. Tyler, what's that going to look like in light of Ottawa's plan to ban 1,500 kinds of guns?
Yeah, it's a good question. So when Jason Kenney came out last week, hours after this whole thing was announced, he panned it, saying this wasn't going to do much to stop crime. It was, making criminals of law-abiding gun owners. And he hinted at a couple things. Now, the first and the main one really is that he hinted there might be a provincial firearms officer created that would perhaps take over the role of the federal chief firearms officer. Now, the logistics of that I don't think are especially clear, but what House Leader Jason Nixon indicated was that there's going to be a motion before the legislature in support of, law-abiding gun owners and hunters and things like that. This has been done before. The UCP did put a similar motion forward about a year ago, and it was unanimous in front of the legislature. Now, I say unanimous, but I think there were only about 20 or 30 of the MLAs there. So it was a unanimous of the folks who were in the House at the time. Which brings me just one other thing I should slip in is that, middle of the pandemic, the legislature is sitting with social distancing measures. So people are, one chair apart and things like that. This is not a virtual sitting of the legislature like we've been seeing with, varying degrees of success happening in Ottawa.
Yeah, absolutely. But the focus of the official opposition here in Alberta seems to be how hard meatpacking plants have been hit during the coronavirus pandemic. Tyler, the NDP is hoping to push for an emergency debate on the issue to maybe discuss forcing the closure of some of these plants in Brooks, Calgary, and High River.
Yeah, the NDP has been hitting this issue really, really hard. As I'm sure viewers would know, there's just been hundreds and hundreds of cases linked to these plants and deaths from them as well. So the NDP, getting back to their, workers' roots maybe a little bit on this one. Question period on Wednesday, this came up numerous times, saying that not enough was being done, not enough was being done. So yes, they're pushing for an emergency debate. There is going to be an extended debate on COVID-19, of which I would expect that to be a large portion. But, as we are looking towards sort of some of the reopening plans, I mean, the outbreaks are really, really sort of clustered in the Calgary area and around these meatpacking plants. I mean, Edmonton spared really the brunt of this. In many ways up here in Edmonton, life has not changed all that significantly. It's like living in a totally different jurisdiction, I think, compared to the scope and the impact of the pandemic elsewhere in the province.
And the province has recently announced reopening the economy in different phases. The next phase will not begin until May 14th, so you and I can finally get a haircut.
Yeah, as viewers can see, I'm losing the battle against quarantine hair, and I haven't quite got desperate enough to pull out my dog trimmers to give it a go myself. But yes, that's right. May 14th is the planned date. Now, when the Premier announced this, there was not uncertainty, that would be the wrong word, but he was very careful to say that this is all contingent upon, what's happening. So May 14th is the date set for retail to open. That will include, stores, that'll include hairdressers, as you mentioned, that'll also include restaurants, bars, cafes, not nightclubs, but it will, in theory, include pubs. That's a tricky little situation that's dependent on what liquor license an establishment has. But assuming cases continue to go down, assuming cases continue to stabilize, things should kick off May 14th. That, fingers crossed. And then the other phases, there's 2 more phases, those will sort of roll in depending on how things go.
Lethbridge West MLA Shanna Phillips brought up an interesting point recently in that who's going to pay for the research and testing as the Alberta economy slowly reopens?
Yeah, the NDP's been hitting quite hard on some of the, unknowns on these things. So part of the relaunch plan, which actually Jason Kenney announced way back at the beginning of April in his televised address, was that there was going to be this massive expansion in testing capacity. So the question that Shannon Phillips raising, who's going to pay for this? Where's that money coming from? Who's doing the research? Those questions are sort of still floating out there. And the other one that the NDP has been really hammering away on this week in the legislature has been this question of, how is this reopening going to work? They're saying that there's questions about social distancing, about are there cleaning protocols, things like that. And on Wednesday in question period saying, well, why didn't you guys consult before you came up with this plan? Why are they asking questions now? Shouldn't these have been answered? So there's some uncertainty, shall we say, and lots of politics going on as well about the how this is going to proceed.
The province has started up an agriculture panel to advise the government. Now, you see, it's kind of like the War Room, but a little more useful.
Yeah, I think so. The War Room obviously has had its ups and downs over the past year, and a bit of a fresh slate maybe with this sort of industry panel on agriculture. So it seems it's mainly agriculture and forestry. There are representatives from the Cattlemen's Association in there. It's not 100% clear to me, the extent to which those different industries are going to be the main focus, but as viewers in Lethbridge are no doubt familiar with, there have been some ups and downs for the Canadian agriculture and ranching business in the past year or two. We had the canola problems with China, I think it was, and beef exports to Japan and South Korea. It's getting a little fuzzy in the back of my mind with all this going on. But anyways, the idea is that this is going to sort of share some good news stories about the sector, which employs like 75,000 Albertans, just massive industry, maybe the second largest in the province. And so, they're a 10-member panel, I believe, doing these things. And so what it's going to look like sort of in practice, I think is, as it always is, one of those things we won't totally know till it gets rolling. But certainly there are some sort of quite specific issues, it seems to me, in terms of exports, in terms of supply chain stuff within Canada that provide some pretty obvious avenues for this panel to be looking at.
Tyler, there's some serious concerns that the province may be selling off provincial parks. Can you give us a bit of background and maybe an update if you can?
Yeah, so unfortunately, I can't give you the full update because the full update was supposed to come on Monday, and the government has sort of not done that. I mean, they're busy with other things, I assume. But the basic deal is this. They are going to close 20 provincial parks, and there are 164 provincial parks that they are looking for third-party managers of. So instead of the province, having provincial staff handling these parks, they'll find whether that's a First Nation, whether that's a conservation group, things like that. Now, the catch here is that if they cannot find third-party managers, that land will revert to general Crown land. And what that could mean down the line, and that's what sort of came up a little bit this week in terms of people raising some concerns, was that the government could sell this Crown land. There's been some Crown land sales, I believe, down by Medicine Hat that caused a bit of a ruckus some months ago. So the concern is really that if no one's going to go in to manage these parks, they could end up on the auction block, and sort of who knows what will happen to them. Now, this isn't a massive chunk of land. I think we're talking 16,000 hectares all total from all 180 odd parks they're looking at. Some of them are quite small. So we're not talking about closures of like, the sort of whole Nordag region or something like that. But obviously, conservation groups, outdoors people are keeping their eye on this and quite concerned about, what could happen to the park in the neighborhood if a manager can't be found.
Highways and bridges across southern Alberta will be seeing $2 billion worth of upgrading, but a question a lot of us around here want to know is how soon will we see the twinning of the Highway 3 corridor?
It's a good question. There's been a few highway announcements that, it boggles the mind sort of that they hadn't been fixed yet. I remember we'd almost talked about one up north a couple weeks ago and it was just middle of nowhere, just deadly highway. But yeah, this is part of sort of a larger infrastructure stimulus package that was introduced last month. I think the government said they expect it to create about 600 jobs. So maybe the twinning is en route. There's also, money available for potholes and things like that. So, we'll see how that sort of all shakes out. There is a list of the bridges and roads that are going to see some work done. That I'd be a famous researcher or something if I could remember them all off the top of my head. But there is money, and this chunk of spending, these 600 jobs, I believe, per the government's announcement, are specifically for southern Alberta.
You know, the more pothole patrols, the better. That's what I always say here too.
Isn't that the truth?
The Kenny government is also helping the people of Fort McMurray. As Tyler, they're dealing with over $100 million in damages from the devastating floods there.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, that city just can't get a break. You know, the engine of this province, such a huge place of work for so many people in the province and so many people across the country, frankly. And just, you know, rounds of bad luck too. You know, you had Brian Jean, the former Wild Rose Party leader, had his house burned down and they rebuilt it in the same neighborhood, and then it flooded again. So evacuation orders are beginning to lift, I believe. So people should be able to start getting home and take a look at things. But it seems to me there's all these issues that came up in the fire last time, whether or not that was where were people going to be allowed to rebuild, same sort of discussions that happened in Calgary during flooding there. So, you know, you got to feel bad for the people there who are going to go back through this whole process of, you know, rebuilding their lives, rewriting, you know, municipal construction guidelines, dealing with jobs and finances and government aid and all this stuff, and all this in the midst of a pandemic. So it's just, you know, gosh, you feel thankful that that Edmonton hasn't been hit by any disasters since, I don't know, the tornado maybe.
Well, you know, I talked to some of the people up in Fort McMurray, or, you know, Fort McMoney as they used to call it with the oil sands, but not so much these days. And like you said, I mean, they just can't get a break. You know, many of the business owners dealing with COVID-19, their businesses have been flooded and they rebuilt already from the fires from 4 years ago. Plus, in the wintertime, don't forget they deal with minus 50 to 55 degree temperatures. I used to be the morning man at the radio station up there, and man, it gets bitterly cold.
Oh, that is cold.
It is. Alberta correspondent of the National Post, Tyler Dawson, thanks for joining me today from Edmonton.
My pleasure, Hal.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.